Okay, it seems that most people have managed to get in. If you are having any problems, as I say, please do direct that to the chat. Morning, everyone. I hope everybody's keeping safe and well at this challenging and unprecedented time. We, as a Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, are doing all that we can to keep business moving. So this is one webinar that's part of a series of online webinars that we've launched to support businesses at this time. So thank you for joining us. My name's Charles. I'm a Senior Group Relationship Manager at Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. I think if you have got anything that we can help with, any questions or concerns, please do speak to your relationship manager as members. And if you're not sure, again, drop us a message and we will direct you to the right place. We, as I mentioned, we've launched a series of measures and support mechanisms to help businesses at this time. We've got a web page dedicated to COVID-19. There's a huge support grid which provides details of all the government measures that are available to support you at this time, as well as a Mind the Gap campaign that we've launched. And again, please do explore those measures, have a look at our website and keep in contact with us because we are here to help. In terms of today then, I'm joined by Martin Temple, the Chair of the Health and Safety Executive. The HSE, of course, is a government body. It's designed to encourage, regulate and enforce workplace well-being within the workplace environment. So I will now hand over to Martin, who will go through a few things around this topic of workplace well-being. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Charles, and everybody else who's on the webinar. Today, I'm not going to talk about HSE in general, all the work we do, and the very broad spectrum of things that we do. I'm really going to concentrate only on coronavirus and some of the activities we're engaged in behind the scenes, which is quite a major role, and that may set the scene for you in terms of any doubts, questions, things that you might have in mind. I'm very conscious that the sort of topic that may come up will be around mental health and DSE issues surrounding home working. I'm conscious that there may well be issues around personal protective equipment and also social distancing. And what I think may well come forward is not big and policy things, but actually practical issues that your members may have. And so in view of that, I'm supported by a team from HSE today who are all experts in their own right and hopefully will be experts in the sort of areas that might be interested in. I've got Rob Vondy with me, who's HSE's head of stress policy and health and work programs. I've got with me Matthew Birtles, who is a principal ergonomics here in Science Division, working a lot on industrial work equipment and processes across a whole range of sectors. I've got Kat Makinson Booth, who is a senior scientist in our microbiology unit in Science Division, David Butter, who's head of manufacturing, and Paul Cosser, head of director of regulations here. So hopefully we should be able to cover most topics. If we can answer it, we will. If we can't, we say we can't. That's not to say HSE doesn't know about it, it's just that we won't. But clearly there are lots of things in this area that none of us know or are part of government policy which we're not yet informed about. Let me just make sort of a general opening comments, and that is, we are of course in extraordinary times and we're working with others totally across government, and we're continually reviewing this fast-moving situation and supporting the national effort to tackle coronavirus. And in doing so, it's really using all our policy, our regulatory and scientific capability and experience in striking that balance to provide support on the one hand, reassurance, protection, but also where necessary, still enforcement, because Health and Safety at Work Act still applies, but also there are the guidelines which are there really to make sure that people are protected and working safely for those that have to work. So we're working hard to enable work to continue by publishing practical guidance and carrying out enforcement if workers are being exposed to unnecessary risk. And you can find actually our most recent guidance on all topics, and I'll touch on the range later on in my comments, on www.hse.gov.uk/news/coronavirus.htm. I suggest that you subscribe to this. It's free. Because if you do that, you get the automatic updates. Because as I said right at the beginning, it's fast moving, things are changing, and this will give you the updates without you having to think, oh, I better go on the website and see if something's changed. So I advise you to do that. Let me just now take you through a number of headlines, if you like, where HSE is working behind the scenes and hopefully will prevent you with support and guidance where you need it as well going forward. We are giving advice across sectors, specific sectors, how to work, how work safely, what can work, what can't work. And this has been constantly revised and what we hope are proportionate operational policy positions to a wide range of industry stakeholders. These approaches and advice are kept constantly under review to ensure we remain agile in the face of these emerging challenges. So if you're in a sector, go to the website and see if there are things that's specific to you. And just to give you an example, some of the more specific things, our ChemHD division colleagues from the microbiological unit have been working, for example, with NHS England as they implement the specialist arrangements for treating any patients with COVID-19. And sadly, of course, how to deal with those who are deceased. And in other more specific areas, probably not involving your members, we're working with, for example, Health Protection Scotland on how best to have guidance on infection control on offshore platforms, for example. So a lot going on in the sectoral advice. And if you're in a sector that you want to know more about, go onto our website and check it out. Let me move to respiratory protective equipment and PPE. Obviously, this is an area we're working very strongly on. HSE is advising businesses and the NHS to check they are efficiently managing the provision and use of RPE and PPE. This includes appropriate reuse of disposable RPE and PPE and alternatives to certain items under significant supply pressure. And we know this is topical. We know it's putting people under pressure, particularly health service, and we've worked very closely with the health service to help them look at where they can reuse absolutely safely some of the things that are in particular short supply. And we've also had a response team, and our subject matter experts have been working with Public Health England and NHS England on about testing the fit and the regulatory requirements for example, the FFP3 respirators and powered hoods. And there is actually, again, on the website, frequently asked questions on face fit testing, which is very important to make sure that if you are wearing a mask, it really does work. We've got lots of communication material about this, anything from posters right the way through to social media. And a further point on Public Health England, we've responded to the government chief scientist on the difference between the UK and the WHO guidelines for RPE and PPE, which you'll have heard, no doubt, in the news about. Apparently, are they the same? Are they different? Are they less or are they better? We've also responded to similar urgent commission for the comparability of aprons and gowns, for example, which is another key area that you'll have heard something about. And again, you'll find the findings published on the website. Let me then move on to Public Health England guidance. We have supported Public Health England right the way through with a review of guidance for workers including general infection prevention and control, secondary care, handling clinical waste, and the prevention of infection from the deceased. And so all that's been going on. And if you don't hear that it's come specifically from HSE, that's because nearly all the communication, just to make sure single clear messages are going out wherever possible, communication is being coordinated with the Department of Health and Public Health England. So it's quite usual for them to front it up, but you can get the information, as I keep saying, on our website. Let me then move to the areas around laboratory capacity. And again, you'll have seen it and heard about it in the news about testing and the importance of getting testing ramped up, which seems to have been done. But that's required a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that laboratories are capable and able to do it. And so HSE have been the people who've agreed to a proposal from Department of Health via the Chief Medical Officer so that we could agree changes for workings of these laboratories screening COVID-19 samples to take account of these exceptional circumstances. Once again, our microbiologists from our ChemHD division continue to advise the government on testing capacity strategy, and again, all the communications are being coordinated through Department of Health and Public Health England. I'm then going to move on to biocidal products, and you might be wondering what are we talking about here. These are issues under the COVID-19 supply problems, and it's typified by hand sanitizers, things like that. Again, you'll have heard about these things. And what we have done is taken action, because probably people don't realize, but HSE is one of the approving bodies for a whole ranges of chemicals, biocidal products, agrochemicals, insecticides, rodenticides, things like that, microbiological agents for Europe, which of course changed when we left, but we still have that responsibility of approval for use. And so in this respect, for things like hand sanitizer, biocidal products, we were able to unblock some of the obstacles under the biocidal products regulations to facilitate the increased supply of safe and effective biocidal hand sanitizer products. And this is allowed, and again, you'll have heard some of this, people who are making drink manufacturers, for example, have been able to turn their production to these sort of products. And then I move to our approach to prioritizing regulatory activities in the current climate. Again, our website clarifies exactly where we are on that, but we have in certain areas suspended targeted inspection activities, even of high-risk industries that are not part of the major hazard sectors. And so you'll have seen that in construction and manufacturing, a much lower involvement. But I think that will change as we see more and more people working and more people being exposed to issues, and as receiving lots of reports on issues that are out there in the field. But we are, of course, carrying out work on offshore oil and gas and onshore chemical and explosives and microbiological industry inspections. And we've given them a bit of time to sort of respond to the immediate pressures, but our activities will be very closely looking at them. We'll continue to regulate major hazard industries throughout this time, undertaking wherever possible regulatory functions remotely. Wherever possible, we're trying to not make site visits so that people, are not particularly overexposed. But there is a real need for us to get to present ourselves at certain places in view of the very high number of concerns we've received over the last few weeks from people in the workplace. Of course, across all sectors, we'll continue to investigate work-related deaths, the most serious major injuries and dangerous occurrences, and reported concerns from the workforce or the public where people have been exposed to risk from work activities. And we'll still take action to secure compliance with the law where it's necessary. We'll obviously be there where we have to collect evidence and effective control of risk. where appropriate, of course, to get justice for people. We'll do as much of our regulatory intervention work, as I've said, remotely, but we will be doing it to ensure securing compliance with the law. And where site visits is required, of course, we will ensure that we keep social distancing guidelines will be followed. Let me just talk a little bit about social distancing. We've been working closely with the government departments in providing information on advice on workplace and workforce issues, supporting the UK response about the way work should be conducted. We have a concerns and advice team, which HSE is providing advice and information on social distancing to employers and workers. And there's been a massive increase in call. I think that over the last few weeks, we've had well over 4,000 calls on this. And under the Health and Safety at Work Act, employers, of course, still have a general duty to ensure, as far as reasonably practical, the health and safety and welfare of their employees at work. But what HSE does consider that if an employer is following the relevant Public Health England guidance for their sector in terms of controlling the public health risk, they will be taking reasonably practical precautions to control workplace risk. So we will take that. We are working very closely now with BEIS on the return to work program. It's been very hectic work over the last few days to try and look at how people can return safely and healthily to work. Clearly, those deliberations are going on in the background, but we've been actively engaged in that, as to have other business organisation of which the chambers have also been involved on certain facets of this work. So that is evolving at pace, is clearly very complicated and very delicate, but that is going on. Just to really finalise, and that is the latest information and advice and on our press releases is on our website. I gave you the thing earlier. You can get anything there from RIDDOR reporting, social distancing, face masks, hand sanitizers, right the way through. And on that juncture, I shall stop and open up for questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that detailed, comprehensive insight. And can I kind of echo part of Martin's message there at the end in terms of signing up for those communications and updates. Again, you know, that's really important at the moment, that you're kept up to date. You've got the most recent information. So please do take that recommendation, and perhaps you can put the link just down here if we can. I think it may have just gone up actually. So there's a HSE Gov UK link there. So again, please do follow that one. Okay, so I'm just going to move into a Q&A section now of this webinar. I'll actually start off. I've got a couple of questions to kick things off. So first of all, and this is an open question, as the UK starts to kind of ease the lockdown measures and people start to return to work and back into the office environment, what advice and guidance would you give businesses on how best to approach this and mitigate the risks?
Paul, do you want to pick this up for us? Charles, I can't hear anything. Is that?
Sorry, is that a question for Paul?
I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he's picked it up, but we can pick it up if he's not available, if he's not tuning in. Maybe I'll have a sort
why don't you do that then, Rob?
Yeah, because it ties in with a number of the other questions that we've had submitted. But I think Martin's outlined the social distancing guidance that is fundamental in all this return to work. the transition back to work is going to be a major challenge for everybody concerned. And what we're looking for is trying to provide practical advice and guidance to all employers to what steps they can take. And I think where the COVID virus is concerned, that is just one hazard amongst many hazards in a workplace. Employers have a duty of care to ensure the health, safety and welfare of their employees. And certainly the factors around potential exposure, because when the lockdown is sort of lifting, the virus is still going to be around. So employers have to be particularly vigilant in how they support their most valuable asset, their employees. And it's then just sort of taking steps to think about the practical things they can do. Social distancing has been mentioned. When HSE returns on block, we'll have that challenge because we're an open plan. We're quite closely grouped together. So it'll be a challenge for us to get our heads around. But it's about that. What sort of distancing can you build in? Is the PPE that would be helpful for folks returning to work to ensure their health and safety is covered? What alternative working arrangements might there be in terms of flexibility? It could be in terms of hours of work. And the backstop on all of this, as we're currently going through, is home working. You know, is there scope to continue home working? One of the questions that has been presented for me to respond on, there's a real link between all of them, is what if people are coming into work and they've got vulnerable members of their household? You know, how can they prevent transmission of the virus to their family and household members? Well, again, it's applying the same approach, and leaders and managers are critically important in all of this to ensure they're having open dialogue, open communications about the practical measures that they can agree with their employees that will enable the return to work to be done on a safe footing. And I'll stop there if I may, because I'm mindful of the time.
So that latter half of what you were touching on there is something actually that we've touched on as well, in terms of work. You know, putting people at the front of the business and working and communicating and talking
Yes.
through things with your employees to establish what may or may not need to happen. So, yeah, that's a really good point. We've actually had a question come in from a couple of questions actually come in from a few delegates. Perhaps if we could get one of those pop up on screen, if possible, Jess. Thanks, Jess. So, should a documented return to work assessment be prepared?
Well, I think that would be advisable, but I wouldn't say it was mandatory. I think it's adopting a common sense approach here, but if it would be helpful to document the arrangements for the return to work, that covers the risk assessment, the duty of care that the employer has, that will obviously give confidence and reassurance to employees coming back into the workplace. And I'm sort of an old school ACAS person, and I always find that joint discussions to reach agreements on these issues is the most productive way forward. But yes, I think I would say it's not a must, but I would say it is a should.
Yeah.
Charles.
Yes.
The thing that certainly I don't know how it will eventually come out. There will no doubt be deliberations over the next few days about how return to work will be managed, and it'll be a mixture of science and technology and ultimately a political view as well. But there's one thing for sure, and that is HSE will not be capable of dealing with lots and lots of paperwork to say, can this company return to work? Can that one return to work? Because I would imagine it will take best part of 10 years then for everybody to get back to work. It will be very much down to the duty holders looking at things and actually satisfying themselves and the people who work for them that all appropriate risks have been taken in hand, be it those under the Health and Safety at Work Act or those that will still remain in force from Public Health England, which are basically common sense guidelines about how to keep people from infecting each other. So I think that there will be a need for people to assess whether or not there is a risk, but certainly I don't feel that people like ourselves could cope with some massive bureaucracy that would have to be put in place before people could go back to work.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that, Martin. Before I turn to another couple of questions from our delegates, one question I have, and I think it's for Matt if he's there. We talked before around DSC display screen equipment and how businesses can be cross-checking against these. Can you perhaps provide a bit of an insight from your side on that area and that particular area?
Yes, with pleasure. Initially, at the start of the period of isolation, we put out our lines to say that certainly for temporary workers who are working from home with COVID-19 isolation issues, we don't expect people to be providing home DSE assessments or any detailed DSE assessments as you might expect in the office. There has been quite a lot of discussion, I think, since the last UK government announcement that the initial 3-week period of isolation was going to be extended. It did prompt quite a lot of discussion about, well, is this still temporary and do we need to have now DSE assessments? And the line is, no, you don't. The nature of a temporary worker at home because of COVID-19 isolation isn't time bound. And so whether this is for the next 3 weeks, for the next 3 months, or God forbid, but perhaps until December or beyond, we still won't be asking you to suddenly go and do workstation assessments as you might in the office. This said, and there's a lot of guidance on our website on the MSD policy lines and specifically on DSE. This said, it's not a carte blanche to just allow people to go away and predominantly do what they want to do. We can still support as employers, and there's an awful lot of guidance there that's giving very, very pragmatic, very achievable kind of approaches to setting up workstations and to making the kitchen table into a decent workspace, and also into the wider workspace issues of, in this kind of a format, when kids walk across the screen or when people shout you, would you like a cup of tea? And if you're lucky enough, you get that in the office anyway. But those kinds of things, just allowing for that kind of difference in social interaction and these kind of different work patterns. We do have guidance on our website, but there will be some links, hopefully associated with this webinar, of other areas of pragmatic guidance that have been developed since, a lot of them since COVID-19 isolation, that just gives you some very good ergonomics kind of tips and approaches and pragmatic solutions to setting up DSE, and how to make a kitchen table and a kitchen dining chair into a reasonable workspace that you can continue to work without actually putting yourselves at higher risk of musculoskeletal disorders. We're seeing MSDs are on the increase since COVID-19 isolation. There are indicators that it's the aches and pains and backs and necks and upper limbs are rising. We simply don't know whether this is due to DSE work, and I suspect actually some of it will be, but most of it won't. An awful lot of this is to do with the social isolation and then the loss of movement and mobility. We're becoming much more sedentary during social isolation. So the DSE gambit and the guidance, and there will be links to the guidance coming up for you guys, and things that I know of and things that colleagues of mine have put together. There's a much wider issue here for wider well-being, whether it's mental or physical well-being. And the guidance that the central government's put together to keep us active, keep us moving, take that hour a day of activity and walking around, that's the best kind of solution, the best defence you've got against sedentary work, whether that's on a lovely home workstation, if you've got a private office at home, or if it's on a dining table and you're making do with best you can. it's the same potential solution. Pragmatically set up the ergonomics, which there's guidance out there, will get links to you. And also do take the exercise, do take regular breaks. And whenever you're on a phone call that's not involving a video camera, do go for a walk around the garden or around the house, and do keep that mobility up. Take much more mobility than you would normally do in an office. We recommend 5 minutes in the hour. Take 10 minutes in the hour of walking around just to give the body a chance to recover.
Great. No, that's really, really useful advice there, Matt. Certainly made me think about my setup a little bit more. I'm not sure it would pass an inspection as such, but I'm doing the best I can at the moment. And useful to have, you mentioned there the guidelines that are online, and again, we'll make sure we circulate a link to those. I think we'll turn to the last sort of 10 minutes of this webinar now. We'll turn to our delegates for questions. I've seen quite a few engaging in interesting questions coming through. So, Jess, if you could perhaps pop up the next question from our delegates. That's great. So, using public transport to get to work, how should I and other commuters deal with this?
I'm just looking at my team here. Is this something that either Kat or David Butter, if we have Dave, no, we haven't David, Kat or Matthew again might want to pick up. I'm just trying to look at the team who might, or even Nick. Kat, what about you? Can you take this? No, I think we're struggling with the communications there. What I can say is that on all these matters, what we are saying is Public Health England guidelines are really the things that people should take notice of. And something I said in my comments, and I've seen a couple of the questions that are also on the list, where people are asking about public liability, for example. And what I said earlier, but I'll repeat because I think it's quite good guidelines, and that is there are no blanket things that say you're all right at work if you do this or the other. And it comes back even to the transport point, that is, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, employers have a general duty to ensure that as far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety and welfare of their employees at work is looked after and ensured. But in this specific context, in context of COVID, HSE considers that if an employer is following the relevant PHE guidance for their sector in terms of controlling the public health risk, they will be taking reasonable practical precautions to control workplace risks. So I think that does go to answer quite a lot of these more specific questions. And that is, whilst always there are specific circumstances, these guidelines are the things that really say an employer has taken reasonable precautions to protect people. And so this is where, be it where you're on public transport or in the workplace, proper social distancing, all those sort of things, personal hygiene, all those things still apply and will be very important when making sure that you have been seen to do the very best you can do for your employees, keeping them safe and healthy.
That's great. Thank you for that, Martin. Just looking through, there has been a few questions asked. Jess, perhaps if we could turn to one of the others. I think there was a few earlier questions that were asked. There's one in there. Yes, I did see that one. That's a good one. So here, another general question on, how far are the, controls likely to go? With the example being of Asia, I think in Hong Kong, they're using certain extensive measures, decontamination tunnels, temperature scanning, touch point cleaning schedules. And again, can we point our delegates to any useful guides here?
Well, look, we can't talk about whether there's going to be a policy around this at all because we don't know, and it's not our decision, obviously.
No.
What we can do is talk about what's good and sensible practice. And I know this whole area of disinfection and this all that sort of stuff is Kat's area of specialism. And I'll just see again, is Kat on the line? And if so, can she take this?
I'm just going to have a look for you. I'm not sure she's come through, actually. Let me just double check. No, she's not. She's not on. She's not activated. She's not joined.
Okay. Is this something that Nick, you want to pick up on at all? Are you there, Nick?
It's Matt again here, and this isn't my field of expertise, but I think generally speaking, with the approaches that we take at HSE, we use an evidence base and we use a scientific evidence base for the approaches we take. And so while I couldn't talk about specifics like the measures being taken in Asia, it would be absolutely a balance between, is there an evidence base to suggest it is a good control? And the balance would also be, is it practicable? So there are some measures that may be very good controls that are just too expensive and too impossible in terms of infrastructure for you to set up as employees or us to set up as UK government. So it would have to be, and while these things make great headlines and they do look like they're good ideas on the news, it would have to be a balance between the scientific evidence base that they're effective and the practicability of can we implement them without putting undue pressures on employers.
I think, Charles, this is where, again, what we are required in HSE, and we try and encourage across all duty holders, it's about being proportionate. And that there are clearly situations where you could say, oh, well, this could be important, that could not be important. But we're always looking, is the ask bigger than the benefit? And that's what we've got to balance to make sure that we actually allow people to work. Because if you take things to a logical conclusion, you could almost stop most things. And so it's trying to get this balance and proportionality into it. And again, right the way back to what Matt was saying there, you need to know what the science and evidence base is to, in many of these instances, to know the proportional benefit. And that's why a lot of these public health guidelines are about just sensible keeping things clean, keep people properly distanced and all those things. It comes back to those guidelines, which frankly are common sense by and large.
Yeah, no, that's very, very, very good point there in terms of the reasonableness of the measures in that sense. Yeah. So certainly having a look at some of these questions that go into detail and are quite sort of technical and comprehensive. There's that reasonableness test almost to consider. I'm just having a look to see if we've got any further questions. We're coming towards the end of this webinar now. So I think for now, are there any kind of closing remarks that perhaps you, Martin, or any of the other panelists would like to add at this stage?
I think probably in the context of the time, I'll make some general points, and that is, look, what the whole approach we're trying to do is to make sure that people can go to work and can do so safely and remain healthy. And so our whole thrust here is to provide as much guidance as we possibly can, and it keeps moving, so people should keep in touch with it. So we're here to, it sounds one of those almost joke things, but we are here to help. That's our first premise here. We're here to help so people can get advice wherever it's possible. If we know the answer, we'll say. If we don't, we won't. But mainly that's on the website. But at the end of the day, we still have to regulate as well. People are working, and I've got to say, I receive each day, wherever there are deaths in the workplace across the country, I receive those, and I'm still getting them. So people are still going to work, so people are still being injured, and people are still being killed. And therefore, we do have to make sure that we balance this guidance and help with actually also making sure that the regime is properly regulated and the rules are enforced. But I just repeat, we're here to help wherever we can. There is that helpline, the advice and helpline. There is the website, which I suggest again you sign into, and ultimately the thing is that we are being encouraged by and large to work either from home if at all possible, but still go to work, unless it's in one of those areas that is actually specifically said not to by the government. And so that's why all our work is to try and facilitate people to do that. And I just say we're here to help rather than to stop people doing things.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Thanks very much, Martin. Just on that point, I think someone had actually raised to say, where do we go? You mentioned the website. If anybody has got any queries, we put the web address up there. Please reach out and get in touch if you're not sure, and we'll direct you to the right resource.
And Charles, we can send you the practical stuff that we've been producing, good hints and tips in terms of engaging with employees who are home-based, and it leads to the transition back to work. But that is very practical, common sense, as Martin and Matt have been mentioning, and we can get you the links to that. I'd just like to finally say that we're producing an interactive application on risk control, risk management, and stress risk assessment for small businesses. And we're in the last knockings of putting that together. And what we'd love is to have someone to test it for us. And I've raised this with other chambers, and they're more than happy, once we've got it ready in a test form, to push it out to some of their members to see if it is what we hope it will be for them and add some value. So I've got your contact details. I'll be in touch if that's okay when that's ready to go.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. And just a final note to say, we will circulate an email in the post-event details with all the appropriate links, and certainly, Rob, we can look at following up at that on that at a later stage, perhaps. But I think that looking at the timings, that this now draws to a close. I'd like to thank all those from the HSE today, and all of our panelists, and Martin for his time today. And the final point from me, really, on behalf of the Greater Birmingham Chambers, is stay safe, stay connected, stay in touch, and I wish you all a pleasant day and a good weekend as well. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Charles. And if we can have feedback from your members, it would be very helpful, so that we can make sure these are as useful as possible.
Great.
Thank you.